Good morning. I'm Darrell Gunter, your host for Leadership on WSOU 89.5 FM and on the WSOU.net. Well, I tell you, we're very honored and pleased to have Lord Timothy Clement-Jones as our in-studio guest, but he prefers that I refer to him as Tim for this interview. So today we have the pleasure of welcoming Lord Clement-Jones, a leading voice in AI governance and policy. As the former chair of the House of Lords Select Committee on AI and co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on AI, he has played a critical role in shaping the discussion around artificial intelligence in the UK and beyond. With a distinguished background in law and as a spokesperson for the creative industries, Lord Clement-Jones, Tim, brings a unique perspective on the intersection of technology, policy, and innovation. As AI continues to evolve at an unprecedented pace, its potential to transform society is immense, offering both remarkable opportunities and significant challenges. Today, we're going to explore the implications of AI on governance, ethics, and the future of industries worldwide. Let's dive in. Tim, welcome to the program, and thank you for coming on Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter.
Darrell, thank you very much. It's a huge pleasure to be on your podcast and looking forward to our conversation.
Is there anything that you would like to add to your bio that I might have missed?
No, I think probably the only addition I would put is I'm on Team Human, basically. That's my team, and that's why I got involved in technology because I think that's where we have to be, and we have to work out where the humans come into all of this.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let's jump into AI governance and regulations. What kind of international AI governance is needed, in your opinion?
Well, very interestingly, we're diverging more and more in terms of the way we actually regulate. So we've got the EU, and a lot of people are unhappy with the amount of regulation that is involved in AI in Europe. The UK's taken a slightly different approach, but nevertheless, they're still planning to regulate the larger language models. And the US, well, we don't quite know what the US is going to do because Donald Trump has torn up the executive order. That may or may not be the right thing to do, but sure as eggs, there's going to be some time before there's a new regulatory system, if at all, and it's mainly going to take place in the individual states, I suspect. Well, that creates real problems if you're a developer or an adopter, especially a multinational adopter. So what you've got to try and do is find interoperability. And for my money, the interoperability comes by adopting international global standards. And, there are quite a number of different global standards bodies. There are people like ISO, there are people like the IEEE, there are people like the OECD working quite hard at it. And then there are standard setters where, for instance, NIST, the National Institute for Standard Technology in the States, they're so well respected that people say, look, guys, why reinvent the wheel? We should just take the NIST standard and adopt that, basically, say a risk management framework or whatever. But if we actually work together, we can get convergence between these standards. And of course, by and large, the people who work on these standards and agree them are not politicians, they're not regulators, they're people in the industry. So they're practical. So, there is an issue about barriers for for small companies, small and medium-sized companies, because to adopt a standard, sometimes you have to pay to actually use it, and that is a barrier. So we've got to get rid of that. But these standards actually, I think, are emerging quite quickly. Risk assessment frameworks, audit standards, testing standards, monitoring, continuous monitoring standards. So this is actually my hope that we're not going to have a great debate about whether we want to follow the EU or follow the UK or follow the US, that actually our developers and adopters are going to follow these international standards. And I think that could be extremely beneficial.
On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being these international collaborations are happening versus one where it's at its infancy. Where would you say the world is currently in addressing this from a global perspective?
Well, it's really interesting because if you look at what the OECD is doing now, the OECD, is one of those organizations where not everybody signs up to it. Basically, the Canada and the US are observers. It's mainly European countries and so on, but it's doing good work. And I don't think the US has any problem being associated with it. And so that for the West is a good convening organization. China much prefers to deal with the UN, but in practice, because that's the body where they feel they've got they feel more comfortable. They're not a member of the OECD. They join something. They work talk about standards. They want to make sure they've got some influence. So the UN for them is the forum that they prefer to be involved in. But all these major international organizations are converging in one way or another. Because if they start going off at a tangent, nobody's going to listen to them anymore. If you remember, we had the G20 in 2019, we had those principles established, and then all these standards are designed to reflect those principles. So actually, I would give it 4 out of 5. We're not there yet, but
Right.
the direction of travel, I think, is quite exciting. And it's an area where politicians, well, they are going to find themselves actually facing fait accompli. Things will have been done by the techies, by the experts for things like AI safety,
Right.
where they don't need the regulation because this is what these large language models are going to have. If I was the UK government and I wanted a piece of kit, that I wanted to use to make decisions, for instance, on
Mhm.
social security or something like that, I wouldn't just go out and buy any old piece of AI. I'd want something that actually had standards. It was kite marked, maybe in certain ways, so you knew you had assurance about the product. And I think that the assurance industry, if you like, is going to be, increasingly important. And what does the assurance industry in this area need? They need international standards so they can provide that kind of reassurance.
For the person who's listening to this interview, is there a particular website that you would direct them to that lists these particular standards that you follow that you would recommend?
I wouldn't say so. I think you'd have to do a bit more of a search to do that. But I think if you went on the NIST website, you'd find something of interest. If you went on the OECD Observatory website, which is a really good resource that the OECD, although the OECD operates on a shoestring, they put together a really useful site there, which in a sense summarizes everything that's happening out there, national and international. And I suspect that you'd find some commentary on the UN website as well. So I think it's a bit disparate.
Okay.
So and so people are still going to make a living by basically suggesting standards and saying, I know what you need, and there is an industry. I mean, the accountancy consultancies, we're not taking the bread out of their mouths just yet, however much we might want to. But if you go to any of the big four, they've got whole
Oh,
teams
yes.
of people
That's
who are in this business of assurance, and advising clients on the kinds of AI that they should be adopting. And they're increasingly talking to them about standards, I think, rather than regulation.
and I take it that you feel that the UK is a 4 or maybe a 5 in establishing standards.
I think we have got a very good standard setting body in the
Mhm.
British Standards Institute. They basically straddle. They work very closely with people like NIST, but they also work very closely with the European standard setter. They're on their advisory board, the Senelec standards body, which is really that they rule the roost in the European Union. So yes, I mean they're a good body, but I wouldn't say, and this is why I prefer to talk about the standards. I don't think our government really has picked up the ball and run with it hard enough on in terms of regulation, because for my money, I would make mandatory the adoption of standards in certain respects. And I would say whatever the gold standard is for this and that and the other, you've got to adopt it. And also, I mean, one of the areas which we can talk about is things like open source.
Yes,
We're going to need guardrails basically,
that's
because even if we assume that the big large language model developers are 100% ethical and wonderful people and all this kind of stuff, and we can put our faith in Chat GPT or something.
right.
If you have an open source large language model, then the genie can escape from the bottle if
Yeah.
you're not careful in terms of ethics and safety and so on. And I think we need to make sure that we do put those standards as a compulsory, mandatory aspect around those open source models that are developed. And I'm in favor of open source in general, because I think that then allows the smaller and medium-sized tech developers to compete.
Interesting you should mention the open source because DeepSeek has been commanding the news cycle here in the US
Yeah.
with with the senators saying that we need to make sure that they're not on no one who has a government device is using DeepSeek because of their user policy in regards to how they're going to use your data.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is absolutely baffles me. I mean, DeepSeek, should be adhering to a set of standards, but then, they've been developed using far less resource, it seems, because they were driven into a corner by not having the top chips from Nvidia and so on because of export bans. So they've actually innovated in a most interesting way,
Yes.
and they've been able to develop their product without a kind of resource that the big large language models in Silicon Valley have relied on. And I don't know what standards the big large language models in Silicon Valley are adopting. After all, Meta has an open source large language model, Llama, which a lot of people are piggybacking off now. And what guarantee do we have on that? That it's going to be ethical and
Right.
safe and all that kind of thing. So I mean, just because it's got a Chinese investor behind it doesn't mean to say that it's all bad. Put it that way.
Right. Could you define for our audience the risk-based approach and why is a risk-based approach essential for AI regulation?
Well, I think it's really important when you look at what the possible outcomes could be. I'm very keen on outcomes-based regulation. I think you need to see what the impact of something is, and if you look at the impact of some of the large language models, you're looking at chatbots, you're looking at misinformation, disinformation, amplification of untruths. You're looking at the ability to create deep fakes, the ability to create pornography. You're looking at a number of societal harms
Mhm.
which go well beyond free speech or anything like that. You're looking at falsehood. You're looking at damage to people's reputation and all that. And we looked at this, I mean, a long time ago, before the arrival of the large language models. And we thought, well, look, there's detriment here. And what you have to do is assess what that detriment is and decide, what kind of standards need adopting. And if you've got a high risk type large language model nowadays, I mean, for instance, say you've got a model that's making decisions in social security or immigration or things like that. Now, you're affecting the lives of citizens a huge amount in that respect. So that's where I would say the EU model is correct. I just find their way of dealing with it overcomplicated, basically, because they kind of stuck on large language models at the end with their own special code rather than integrated into their total regulatory system. But they're going towards standards themselves. So I think eventually there will be some coming together on that.
Okay. You know, this all centers around the whole AI gambit centers around ethics. And what type of ethical principles should guide AI developments?
Well, it's really interesting because, everybody's just been talking for the last 2 years, I suppose, since our Bletchley Park safety summit about safety, as if this was like a kind of car or a piece of machinery that could drive over you or something, and therefore had to be kept safe. I'm much more in favor of exactly as you say, the ethical approach, and that's the approach that was adopted back in 2019
Hmm.
with the OECD principles, and indeed they were universal because Beijing adopted the almost identical principles
Hmm.
subsequently as well. And the kinds of principles they were talking about was transparency, so that if you are affected by a large language model as a human, you know what it's doing. Accountability, you know who's doing it to you. It's free of bias, so you need to make sure that the data has been tested so that, for instance, if you're a part of a minority, you're not being prejudiced by a decision. A whole range of things of that kind. You could talk about explainability. But those are the key principles. And also, I think at the end of the day, they added on the right to redress. So if a decision is made about you by an AI system, you have the right to question and get redress from the developer or the adopter, whoever the appropriate accountable is in those circumstances. So, it's fairly basic, it's fairly simple, it doesn't. It's not rocket science requiring that kind of accountability.
Wow. And so moving on to copyright and data mining, what is the current state of copyright law regarding AI training on copyrighted material?
Well, this is so interesting because the US has a rather different copyright regime to us, and everybody said, "Oh, look, the law may be more certain in the UK," and I'll come on to what we're doing here.
Hmm.
But in the States, oh, it's really contested. We got this fair use, these large language models, they don't need to adhere to copyright because it's all their training use of copyrighted material is covered by fair use. Well, actually, the District Court of Northern California is beginning to prove them wrong. And, I don't follow every single law case, but there was one that only came out very recently, in favor of the creative industry that was suing OpenAI or Anthropic. I can't remember which one it was. But, it's really interesting the way the law is developing in the US. And of course, it's highly ironic that OpenAI is claiming that DeepSeek distilled its contents, basically. So, OpenAI is claiming intellectual property rights against DeepSeek. But whereas OpenAI has been resisting signing up with the creative industries, it has done deals with, I think, News Corp and with the FT. But Anthropic hasn't, as far as I know. So it is highly contested, even in the States. And I think that in the UK, unfortunately, we're moving in the opposite direction, where our people are basically saying, "Oh well," our government is saying we need a text and data mining exception for big tech when they train these large language models, which will allow them to use copyright material unless the creative artist or the writer or the filmmaker or the musician has
Hmm.
said no, i.e., has opted out. Now, opting out is really difficult, because all these large language models have crawled, have used crawlers
Yeah.
and scraped all the data off the web, and so the horse has bolted anyway. But even where there's new material, creative artists don't spend a lot of time, building walls around their
Right.
website. They
Right.
want the world to know about it, but they don't want people to copy it. They want people to say, "Oh, I like that tune. I'll stream it, I'll buy it, or the author wants their book, to be read and bought from the bookshop. So, they do want to be compensated for this, but our government at the moment seems to be moving in the direction of big tech. And so there's a very, very big movement taking place. We've had a new coalition created through artists who want to make sure the government changes its mind. There's a consultation taking place. And, already thousands of letters are going out to members of parliament saying, don't don't do this, and I'm hoping that that's going to be successful. Now, obviously the state of play in the States is different, but I think the great thing in the States is it takes a heck of a lot longer to get new legislation through Congress. So I doubt whether anytime soon you're going to have a text and data mining exception, but it may be that the Northern Californian District Court, you know, creates a law that's favorable, or interprets a law in a way that's favorable to the creative industries. And good luck.
And so I guess that's one area that the creators, while they're competitors, but they're also in this fight together to protect their intellectual property. So AI is helping the creators in many ways, but it's also affecting them negatively in other ways. What are the key areas that you see that the creators are concerned about AI having effect on their intellectual property?
Well, it's both ways. It's both using it. And by the way, you're absolutely right. I mean, creators use AI, are beginning to use AI quite a lot, but that's rather different because they're using it in circumstances where they're putting their material into AI and then using AI creatively. I mean, Paul McCartney was on our television screens only a week ago, and he was admitting that he thought AI was great in many ways. They repurposed, remastered, recording with John Lennon from way back and so on. But he was saying, look, it's fine, but you need to be paid for it. If you're an artist and your material is being used for training, then you need to be paid for it. Now, that's one sense. But the other end of it is, what's the output of these large language models? Is it very similar to my original output?
Mhm.
And am I being compensated for being, my material being copied, whether I'm a musician or an artist or whatever? I mean, it's fine to copy Van Gogh. He's out of copyright now. You can ask Mid Journey or whatever to say, do me a picture in the style of Van Gogh. No, that's fine, but don't ask it to do a picture in the style of David Hockney because he's alive and it's copyright. So this is the difference basically. And the reason intellectual property was effectively recognized in the early part of the 18th century. It's been going for 300 years, is because this was an incentive to artistry, to music, to writing. And if we take that away, where's the incentive? People can't make a living as an artist or a creative, and we do want that. And that's exactly the point where I'm for the humans, not the machine.
Right. And in regards to blockchain, have you heard or seen any discussion about folks placing their content into a blockchain where it could be tracked and traced? So you'll know
Yes,
where
I,
someone.
I think I think blockchain does have some considerable possible benefits, certainly to prove provenance. But how many artists will know how to do that? That is the problem. And the same for watermarking. I mean, I'm a watermarking fan. If they can invent indelible watermarking,
Mhm.
maybe linked to the blockchain in some shape or form, some kind of metadata that stays there in the content, and therefore means that you can always identify whether your material has been used because it sort of stays through, like a dye all the way through the material when it comes out the other end. Well, that's a different ball game. But actually, what we're arguing for in the UK, and I suspect that in the States, a lot of the big music companies and so on will be asking for the same, is transparency. We need
Yes.
to know. We want that nice Mr. Altman to tell us what he's using to train his OpenAI models. And the same with the other developers.
No, this is quite similar when Google was scraping everyone's website and making billions off of advertising, and now we have a gentleman with OpenAI where, you know, I don't know if they're profitable yet, but their valuation is in the billions.
Yeah.
That and they're not providing the people who have provided the text information some type of compensation.
No, exactly. And, I mean, I shudder to think how much they should have paid in compensation. And given they're worth 100 billion or whatever it is, then I think they could cut the creative industries a bit of slack, frankly. But well, I mean, these cases are quite hard fought, and OpenAI have only really settled where they need the news content in order to answer, queries and so on. And you can see why, because without that up-to-date news content, they can't really deliver a service. But what, do a deal with an artist or a music company? No, that's a different story. So it's highly pragmatic the way they're dealing with this.
Wow, believe it or not, we're down to the last few minutes. So I'm gonna have to have you back because I had like 40 questions I wanted to ask. But can you give us your viewpoint on the immediate future, the next 6 to 12, 18 months, what we should expect from AI?
Well, I think it's extraordinary. AI is going to be embedded in all of our working lives. Now, already it's on our smartphones, but we don't really know it's there. But now, increasingly, there are apps that you can put onto your phone, Perplexity and Notebook LLM and various other and Chat GPT. You can put them on your phone. You can use them instead of Google. I mean, it's quite interesting how Google has now got competition in the search field effectively.
Yes, yes.
And it's one of the great benefits of some of these search tools. It's opened up competition. I'm a huge believer in competition, but I think more and more when we go into work, we're going to find that our employer is using tools. And it may even be, cutting back on the number of sort of researchers it might need. Or, I always thought that in the legal profession, which I'm a part of,
Mm.
we would find that we didn't need paralegals. Now, actually, we're finding paralegals can do the job of a junior partner basically in a law firm because of the kind of tools that are available. So in the workplace, there are going to be a lot of that, but also agentic AI is what's coming down the track. And that means we ourselves in our working lives, it'll work out my tax bill, it'll remind me about birthdays, and it'll make appointments with doctors, it'll do all kinds of things. And then the next stage will be marrying that with robotics in a much more sophisticated kind of a way. And, already in fields like health and so on, medicine, that's beginning to happen. But I think that's going to be the next frontier of, in ordinary everyday life.
I've spent a number of years in the scholarly publishing industry, and I think it's going to turn it on its head. But
Yeah.
it's going to allow us to eliminate some of the bad research that sometimes slips, not sometimes, a lot of times slips through.
Yeah, if we can make sure that the information that goes in is accurate, we can make sure that the answer to the questions are accurate and so on. And what they're beginning to do is do these kind of walled garden type language models, small language models, if you like. And
Yes.
I think the use of them is brilliant. Whereas if we just garbage in, garbage out. There's an awful lot in there in GPT-4 that you wouldn't want to have put in there in the first place because it comes out in a hallucinatory form. So, how you clean the big language models, I think is going to be one of their big issues, actually.
Absolutely. Well, Tim, I want to thank you for coming on our program. We are here with Lord Tim Clement-Jones from the UK. Um, please Google him. He has a number of papers that he has written, and he has a great website. Tim, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you, Darrell. It's been a huge pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up this week on Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter. And we want you to have a great day or a great weekend. But remember, leadership begins with you.